we may have just made a record for the most value given in the first 10 minutes of a podcast ever.
Influential and thought-provoking minds in marketing, sales, and business. The Business of Marketing Podcast.
Welcome again to the Business of Marketing. I'm A. Lee Judge. Marketing is part math, part art, and a large part science, particularly behavioral science. And as marketers, our goal is to move our prospective customers to take action towards our product or service. But how do you influence that behavior? Well, today we're going to give you some answers to that question because our guest today is the author of a book called Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. So welcome to the show, Nancy Harhut.
Thank you so much, Lee. I am psyched to be here.
Yes, I'm psyched too. And psych is the key word here, I guess, right? Because there's I see what you're doing there. Because I love marketing and I love psychology. And today we're going to get a chance to kind of dive into both of those, right?
Sounds good,
So,
yeah.
let's start off, Nancy. Before we get too deep into this, we're both marketers. Our audience understands marketing, but can you give us a baseline to help our listeners understand exactly what behavioral science is and how we can apply it to marketing?
Yeah, no, and that's a great place to start because, sometimes people hear science and they're like, test tubes and lab coats, and their eyes just roll back in their head and they're like, that's not my thing. I'm about creativity and influence, and the truth of the matter is behavioral science, very simply, is the study of how people behave, and more specifically, why they do what they do. And when you think about it, in marketing, we're all about trying to get people to do something, right? We want them to click or call or buy or try or buy again or be an advocate or refer. And so if we can understand why people do what they do, it helps us as marketers get out in front of them and put the kinds of tactics and techniques and nudges into our marketing messages that increase the likelihood that people will do what we're asking. There's no magic wand. We can't make everyone do everything we want all the time, but we can increase the likelihood that we can reach them, that we can make them pay attention to our message, that they can easily understand it, and that they'll be more likely to act on it by applying some of these behavioral science techniques. And so that's really, at its core, what using behavioral science in marketing is all about. It's just knowing how the brain works and influencing people so that they're more likely to do what we're asking them to do.
And as marketers, it's in everything we do, from our emails to how we design our web pages and our landing pages and our pricing. So I've been listening to you for quite a while, and this is an area that I'm really fascinated in because I have a minor in psychology myself. So I think about these things a lot. And there's so many different effects and phenomena and techniques that have names and frameworks around them that we can name and recognize and utilize. So I want to do something fun, Nancy. I have a list of these effects. And what I want to do is we're going to do a lightning round, and I'm going to give the name of the effect and a short definition of it. And I want you to answer either yes, cool, or not quite. Yes being that it's, hits a light bulb. You want to share more about it. Cool. Maybe you have some interesting case study you want to share with us, or I might be off point. So if I missed the boat on that one and it's not quite right, just say not quite. And maybe we'll come back and discuss it and get some more definition. So the rule's going to be yes, cool, or not quite. You ready?
I feel oddly like I'm getting ready for a high school biology exam, but yes, I am ready. Okay, let's go for it.
Or a game show.
Or a game show, I know. Yeah, really.
Okay, so I'm going to read through these. I'm going to look back and see what your answer is. I'm going to go right to the next one, okay?
Okay.
All right, here we go. The isolation effect. People remember things that stand out like colors, bold fonts, and unexpected words.
Yes, you got it. That is true.
The more exposure effect. Repeated exposure increases familiarity and trust.
Mere exposure effect, as opposed to more exposure. But Mere. But interestingly, it is the increased exposure that has the effect you just talked about. The more people see things, the increase in familiarity and trust and credibility and believability. So it probably should be called the more exposure effect. But for whatever reason, the behavioral scientists call it the mere exposure. I guess merely exposing people to it can increase those feelings of familiarity and trust. So there you have it.
I misread it. I actually had it over my screen as mere, and I mispronounced it because I was thinking more. All right. Next, the scarcity principle. Limited availability makes people value something.
Absolutely. We essentially want what we can't have. It goes back to, remember in high school, the the heartthrob that we wanted to pay attention to us. If they weren't interested, we really, really wanted them. If they were interested, maybe we weren't as interested, like we want what's hard to get. That's the whole thing about scarcity. If it's harder to get, we value it more.
Awesome. Next up, the decoy effect. People gravitate towards a middle price option when a higher price choice makes it seem like a better deal.
Yes, that is true.
All right. The endowed progress effect. People are more likely to finish something when they feel they've already started.
That is also true.
All right. The temporal landmarks effect. Fresh start effect. People make big decisions at key moments like New Year's and birthdays.
Yes. I mean, when you think about it, New Year's, nobody says, I'm going to give up smoking on Wednesday. Nobody says, I'm going to give up smoking on Monday, right? So New Year's Day is like a huge temporal landmark, but so is the beginning of the week. So is your birthday. So is the anniversary that you got hired or the day that you get promoted. These are all times when people feel like they have a fresh start. It's a blank slate, right? Who they were is in the past, along with anything that they failed to accomplish. Who they are now at this fresh start, the beginning of the year, the beginning of the week, the beginning of the quarter, the beginning of the term, if you're a student, your new birthday, your new anniversary, it just opens up possibilities, and we feel more confident that we're going to achieve the things that we want to achieve. As a result, from a marketing perspective, people are more open to switching vendors, to trying new products, to taking on new tasks, making new commitments. And that's why fresh starts are so temporal landmarks are so important to us as marketers when we need to look for these, periods where things are starting. And I said Mondays because Mondays are the start of a week. But for some people, for some brands, it could be the start of the weekend. That's, the fresh start. It's like, all right, last weekend didn't go so well for me, but this weekend, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to get that exercise program in, or I'm going to get to the theater, or I'm going to try that new restaurant. So knowing what those kind of periods are that mark the change, the transition from the old to the new is critical for us as marketers.
All right. Got 2 or 3 left. I want to come back to that one too, especially for gym marketing. The framing effect, how information is presented changes perception.
Absolutely. When we present information, we're not just conveying the information, we're also determining how people are going to react or respond to that information.
Okay. How about the bandwagon effect? People follow what others are doing.
Yes, also known as social proof, right? Some people call it social proof, some people call it bandwagon effect. But yeah, we look around, we see what other people are doing, and we follow them. We jump on the bandwagon.
All right. And this one I'll probably mispronounce. The Zeigarnik effect. People remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones.
Yes, and that's, when you're watching TV or serials, it's like the cliffhangers. It's like, all right, that's the last episode until it comes back in, next season or next month or whatever. And we have a tendency to remember those, right? Because we want to know how they end. And until we get that closure, that resolution, they stay in our brain. And it's one of the reasons why abandoned cart messages work so well. It's like, hey, you put it in your cart, but you didn't follow through. It's like, oh, right, that's true. And it kind of plants that seed, and then it nags at you until you finally resolve it one way or another and get that closure.
Okay, and this last one, now you and I are both recently released book authors, and so I think this one should hit home for both of us. The authority principle. People trust experts, credentials, and official endorsements.
This is absolutely true. And that is why when people pick up cash, they're going to know that they can trust the author because you're the one who wrote it. And they're going to say, this is information I can use. This is information I can rely on because it's coming from someone who's an authority. So, yes.
That's a wonderful. And thanks for the plug on the book. So, of those, let's go back in deep. In fact, I just realized we may have just made a record for the most value given in the first 10 minutes of a podcast ever. So let's go back and go deeper on some of those. When we do pricing, I come from the SaaS world, software world, and when we began doing pricing tables back in 2014, 15 or so, we realized if we made one of them stand out more than the other, or if we had some kind of bronze, silver, platinum, we'd make the silver stand out. And that's kind of been stuck in my head ever since in terms of making pricing tables. And even on my own website for Content Monster, for our podcast production, we've never had a customer choose the lowest tier. It's almost always the middle one. Whether we prompt them or move them in that direction or not, Some go higher, and some, in fact, feel insulted if they can't get the higher one. So tell us about that effect. I mean, I know marketers are websites are key to what we do. And so when we're looking at positioning things on our websites, tell us about some of the things we can use, how we can use behavioral psychology or behavioral science to frame our pricing, for example.
Yes, I mean it's a great topic, and we can definitely delve into it. What you're talking about is something that Robert Cialdini, who's considered the godfather of influence, he wrote "Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion," but he refers to it as the pull of the magnetic middle. And the way we are kind of hardwired as humans is, we don't like to feel like we're lagging behind. So we don't want the leftmost option, if you will. But we also don't feel terribly comfortable out on the bleeding edge, right? If you think about, going left to right, I don't know that doesn't feel so great. We have a tendency to cluster in the middle. That's where we feel safe. It feels like, all right, there's other people around here, other people with me. There's safety in numbers. I'm going to stick with the middle. So imagine you're at a restaurant and, the server hands you the wine list, and you look and you're like, man, I don't recognize any of these wines. I mean, I like wine and I have my favorites, but I don't recognize any of these. So what do? You start to look at the prices, right? And you're like, all right, if I buy the cheapest one, it's probably going to taste like swill, right? It's going to be like vinegar. I'm not going to like it. But if I buy the most expensive one, I'm going to get taken. I'm going to overpay. So I'll take one of the middle range ones. Like we just feel that that's a safe choice. So when there's bronze, gold, bronze, silver, gold, for example, we're like, well, I'll take the silver. Maybe the gold is too rich for me. Maybe the bronze is not going to be good enough. I'll take the silver. But to your point, some people will say, you know what? The best one is going to be the most expensive one. The best one is going to be the gold one. I want that. That's my decision-making shortcut. If that's the most expensive one, if that's the one that has the most features, that's the one I'm going to choose. Because people, they cruise through life on autopilot. We're constantly making decisions, and we're trying to make them quickly. We're trying to make them expending as little mental energy as possible. And so, over the generations, we've been kind of taught that the most expensive one has all the bells and whistles, and I'm probably not going to go wrong. So some people are just going to say, I don't have time to do the research. Give me that one. That's the one I want. And it also says something about me. It says that I have expensive taste, or it says that I can afford the best one, or it says that I'm successful enough to need the best one. Other people are going to say, as I said earlier, I don't know. I don't have time to look at all three of these options. Maybe I'll overpay here. Maybe I'll not get enough here. So I'll choose the middle option, So it's very interesting, but people are going to be relying on these decision-making shortcuts. And so in marketing, especially in digital marketing and in e-commerce, I always say to my clients, test these things. So you're going to have your three options. You can test them low to high, and you can test them high to low. Because sometimes what happens is that first one that people look at is their anchor, and they'll use that to evaluate every other option. So if you've got a $100 option, a $50 option, and a $25 option, they might look at the 100 and go, ooh, that's a little expensive, but the 50 looks a lot better. But if you start with the 25, it's a lot harder to get them up to the 50, because the 50 is twice as expensive as the 25. So varying, whether it's most expensive to least expensive or least expensive to most expensive is also a good test for a marketer to try. But that idea of the magnetic middle is very compelling. And there are other things that we can do in addition to putting the option that we want people to choose in the middle. We can sometimes make it a little bit larger. We can put a little, popular choice band or button on it. Not button is the wrong word, but a starburst or a snipe or something. Because these are also cues that people rely on as they're trying to make decisions. So it's very rich, this idea of testing pricing. And of course, if we find a win, it's very profitable for us. So it's worth investing the time to think about these. And as your listeners consider how they might want to do some testing, they should factor these things in. This idea of people gravitating toward the middle, this idea of maybe starting most expensive to least as opposed to least to most, because they can see some incremental lifts. There was a study that came out of Colorado, and it was listing beers in a pub, and they either listed, some weeks it was most expensive to least, and then other weeks they flipped it. It was least expensive to most. And when they finished the experiment, they found that listing most expensive to least actually got them a lift in revenue. So So it's there's a dollar and cents reason for doing some of these tests. It's just interesting to see the decision-making shortcuts that people rely on. And
I
you look
suppose
at the
people
first one
must,
and you grab it, right? I'm sorry.
again, I guess we attach ourselves to that value. Like if I'm looking at a list from highest to lowest price, I'm thinking, how far low do I want to go? How cheap am I? Right? As a, you start off with a high price. You're like, well, this is too expensive, but how cheap am I going to get? As opposed to how much can I afford to spend? Like, you mentioned earlier the anchor price. Like the anchor, if my anchor is cheap, is $1 beer, then when I get past 5 or 6, I'm thinking, you know what? I've done a lot of increasing. I feel good about that. I don't need to go to 15. I've done a lot of increasing from 1 to 10. Maybe I'm good there. Now, there's another thing that it may be in the same realm, and tell me if this is whole different effect. But in terms of pricing, I noticed that, and this is most popularly referred to when you see like at a movie theater where you have your three prices of drinks, right? You may have one at $2, a small, and then a medium at 3, and a large one at 3.50. You go, wait a minute, it's a whole dollar from small to medium, but only 50 cents from medium to large. So you end up buying a large anyway. Is that part of the same standout, or is that another whole different effect?
So you know what that is? That's what some behavioral scientists refer to as decoy pricing. And the decoy price is the price that's there to get you to buy something else. And so in this case, it would be the $3 option, because you can have a $2, you can pay $1 more and get the $3, or you can pay 50 cents more and get the 3.50. You get the largest. So you assume it's small, medium, large, and you're like, wow, for only 50 cents more, I can get the large. I'm going to do that. So the $3 one is kind of what they call the decoy. It's designed to get you to go up to that 3.50, whether it's soft drinks, whether it's popcorn at the movies. There are many places that do this. I was on vacation in Mexico and picked up the drink menu at this restaurant, and it was a very similar thing. They had a small for one price. They had a medium that was significantly more expensive than the small, and then the large was just a little bit more. It was in pesos, so I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was just a little bit more for for a larger drink. And you look at that and you're like, wow, I'm going to go with that. And Lee, the number of waiters going by with these large goblets, like people were ordering the biggest drink because it was only 50 pesos more, really interesting. So having that middle option be the decoy can get people to take the larger one. Other times, the middle option is where people are going to go because they feel comfortable there. So it depends on, it's a nuanced science. In this particular case, as you said, $2, $3, $3.50, people look and it's a no-brainer. Why would I pay 3 when for 50 cents more, I can have this one?
Now, is there a dark side to this though? And once marketers understand how to use behavioral psychology and we understand how we can persuade customers to change their behavior, is there a dark side? And I'll give you an example, something that happened to me just a few nights ago. We're at a popular American chain steakhouse, and my wife ordered a drink, and she ordered I guess it was the medium size of the two. Actually, it was like a regular size and a large, and I think the large was called like tall or something. And she ordered a regular one. It was a mixed drink. They came to the table, did the shaker, poured it, and the shaker had stuff left in it. And they took the shaker and they began walking away with it. And she's like, hey, well, can you leave the shaker here? They're like, oh, well, this is for the tall boy. We can't leave this with you. And I'm like, but what are you going to do with that? She's like, you know what? I'll just leave it here for you. I said, no, really? What were you going to do with the rest of that? Oh, we're just going to pour it out. And I was like, okay, so you're making the same drink and you're selling it at two prices, but somehow from a behavioral standpoint, you're getting a bit more for those who pay more and you're throwing away the rest. So to me, that felt a little bit icky once I realized how we're being manipulated. So can you think of any instances where should marketers stop and not cross the line when they understand how they can affect someone's behavior?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's one that, I've been asked before, and other behavioral scientists have been asked before, because it's an important one. I like to talk about using behavioral science to motivate, as opposed to manipulate. And it's a tool in and of itself. It's a tool, and in the hands of the user, we can use it for good or for bad. Just like you can email people, you can spam them, or you could carefully curate your list. The idea of email in and of itself isn't inherently good or evil. It's email, but how someone chooses to use it. Are they going to spam, or are they going to send relevant messages to a well-selected audience? It's similar with these behavioral science principles. Honestly, just because we can doesn't necessarily mean we should. So I always say to my clients, we want to use these tools in an ethical way. We want to use them responsibly. We want to use them so that we're getting to a win-win. Here's a situation. People are cruising through life on autopilot. They don't take the time or have the time to think through every decision. And what we want to do is we want to make it easy for them to come to a good decision. So that's kind of predicated on the fact that we're selling a product that is good, that we've targeted people that really can benefit from it. And as much as we're prompting, nudging them in a direction, we're still giving them free will. So they don't, here's your three choices. We're going to maybe put the choice we want you to take in the middle, but that doesn't mean that you can't take the one to the left or the one to the right. You still have that free will. But what we want to do is we want to be honest and responsible and ethical as marketers. We don't want to be manipulating people because honestly, Lee, in the short run, sure, we'll get some sales, but in the long run, that erodes brand trust, that it angers customers, and that's the kind of thing that you can maybe never undo. Once people feel that they've been taken advantage of, that they've been misled, that they've been mislied to, they're done with you. They're just not going to. But on the other hand, if you've done something to help them come to a good decision more quickly, help them not overlook something that they would really benefit from, well, then that's a service that benefits both them and you as the brand. So it's just really a matter of being, ethical and responsible. If you wouldn't say this to your friend or to your family, don't say it to your customers and prospects. It's as simple as that.
Well, let me ask you this. Everything we do in marketing is always evolving. So are there times, or maybe you have examples of where things that we used to do from a behavioral science standpoint in marketing used to work, but don't work so much anymore because maybe technology or our habits have changed?
Yeah, I think what happens is like many things in marketing, things kind of ebb and flow. They start to work really well, they get really hot, then they start to fall off a little bit. People are like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with that. The idea of scarcity, right? We're talking about like, we value things that are harder to get. If something is scarce, we're much more likely to go after it. It's like, if something is available, it's widely available, we want it, we get it. If we're not interested, we don't bother. But when you say to people, oh, there's only a limited quantity, or this is only going to be around for a certain amount of time, or this is only available to a certain group of people, but not to everyone, that can change things. It makes a switch flip on us, and suddenly we're like, oh, well, I think I want this then. Like if it's not always going to be around, I better get it now. And that's the whole idea of scarcity. So, so what happens is, particularly in travel, for example, a lot of the airlines and hotels started to use it. Only 3 left, only at this price, only 5 left at this price. And, so what was happening is initially people were like, oh my gosh, I got to jump on this. But then what they began to find out was some of these travel industry players, not all of them, but some of them were, kind of gaming the system. There's only 3 left at this price, but there's 300 more at $1 less or something, And when people began to realize that, it's like, wait a minute, there are only supposed to be 3 left, but that's what it said yesterday. And I come back, today, and there's still only 3 left, and they start to get wise to it. And then they get a little skeptical. And so then, because there are a couple of, bad actors that misuse that technique, suddenly people are like, meh, the skepticism and the mistrust arises, and then it stops working for a lot of people, a lot of marketers, when, really it could. And then eventually that falls off a little bit, and suddenly scarcity, for example, starts to work well again. So there are things that I think just ebb and flow. I grew up in direct mail years and years ago, and we would sometimes find that, snap packs were really hot, the kind of mail piece where you perf off the sides and open it up, and, that everyone was using them. And then people were like, and then you stop using them, and then I don't know, 2 years later suddenly they come back into vogue again because people haven't seen them in a while. Similar things with with emails. Emojis have a tendency to work well. The more and more people that use emojis in their subject line, the more common the audience is going to find them, and the less likely they'll be to attract attention. If you scan your inbox and there's a single email subject line with an emoji in it, your eye will go right to it. We talked about the isolation effect. Things that are different from their surroundings stand out. If you're scanning your inbox and all 15 of the emails that you're looking at have emojis, they cancel each other out, right? None of them
You
are
know,
going to stand out.
that
So
happened
it's
this morning. I was looking at someone's post on LinkedIn, and she was saying that she absolutely would avoid connecting with anybody who claimed I help. Like, I help you 10x your business, whatever. Help you do this. And the funny thing was, and I agree, I'm the same way now. I will avoid anybody like the plague if they say I help so and so, especially with numbers after it, 10x this or 100% that. The funny thing is, 15, maybe 10 years ago, I was teaching social selling for LinkedIn at a sales kickoff. And I remember saying, your headline should not say your job title. Your headline should say, what can you do for your customer? And that was the beginning of I help, because the whole sales team began putting in there, I help customers succeed this, I help that, I help that. But as you said before, at that time, it was different. It stood out. It gave you a clear explanation of what that person could do for you. But then once it becomes best practice, best practice is almost like 1 mile behind spam. Like, once it becomes best practice, that means it's heading for a wall, and a few months later, it's spam. And that's what's happened with this scenario. It reminds me of what you said about the emojis. Like, it's best practice for a minute, but now it's spam.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I think, like anything, when people see things a lot over and over and over again, they don't stand out. We're talking about the isolation effect, and we gravitate towards things that are different, that stand out, that surprise us. We notice things that we aren't accustomed to seeing. When things get cliched, or when we just get when they're so commonplace, when we're so used to seeing them, we have a tendency to filter them out. There's no question about that. I would say that there are probably some best practices that marketers should always use. Put them, be more you focused, more customer focused, and less company focused. I don't know if that will ever become something that's a best practice we no longer want to use. So I think there are probably some that are going to stand the test of time, but others, as you say, they get cliched. And then they're one step away from just avoid it at all costs. But that's why marketers always need to be testing. And I think the thing about understanding behavioral science is it gives you a smart platform to test from, right? So if you understand how people make decisions, if you understand the decision-making shortcuts that they often rely on, you can get out ahead of it and say, all right, I'm going to try testing the authority principle against social proof, right? I have good reason to think one or both of those is going to work, because we know that people have a tendency to listen to authorities and accept what they say and do what they ask. So, all right, I'm going to test that. And then we know with social proof, when people aren't certain of what to do, they have a tendency to follow the crowd. So two good reasons, right? So you're testing from two smart hypotheses, and then you put it out there and you see, well, which is going to work better, which is going to work better for this particular audience segment, or for this particular product, or at this particular time. And, sometimes what worked for someone isn't going to work for you. Sometimes what, worked in the past won't work in the future. Sometimes what failed in the past will work now, because things come in and out. But at least understanding behavioral science gives you a leg up in terms of where to even start your testing. But as marketers, we always should be testing.
Well, Nancy, before we go, I want to give you a moment to tell us more about your book, because your background is extensive on behavioral science and marketing, and I don't know if it was coincidental, but I know you have a ton of experience in it, and you are an authority on it. Now, I behoove any marketer to follow you and learn about what you're talking about and get your book. But tell us about the book.
Well, thanks. So it's called Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, Drive Customer Action and Loyalty by Prompting Instinctive Responses. And prompting in this case is not about AI prompting, but it's just prompting, triggering, nudging, tapping into people's instinctive responses. Because, science has proven that we often cruise along on autopilot, and there are certain things that will push us in one direction or another. And as marketers, if we understand what those things are, it helps us increase the likelihood that people will do what we want to do. So the book is 288 pages, 17 chapters, and over 25 different proven, actionable, tactical, and easy to test techniques that you can use to increase the likelihood that people will engage with and respond to your marketing messages. Some readers have said that it's a masterclass in understanding what people do, why they do it, and how to get them to do more of what you want them to do. So I encourage any of your listeners to check it out. It's an easy read, even though science is in the title. It's an easy read. Lots of takeaways, bulleted takeaways, mini case studies, and examples of how to easily apply these tactics in order to increase ROI.
And as marketing and sales get so much closer, I would ask any salesperson, this would be a great tool for a salesperson as well.
It absolutely is. There's a reader named Carl Adamson. He's in the UK, and he was one of the first people to point that out to me. He was like, Nancy, it's called behavioral science in marketing, but it could be behavioral science in sales. He said any business can use this. He has a agile coaching business, and he says, I use it all the time. I share these techniques with my clients who are growing their businesses. But you're absolutely right. Sales and marketing are getting closer and closer, need to be closer and closer. And these are great techniques, whether you're selling in person, whether you're selling online, whether you're selling, in store. But it's really just understanding how people make decisions and, what can help you help them make good decisions.
Absolutely. All right. Well, to wrap up, I want to tell our audience that Nancy is a great person to follow and learn from. You also need to hire her or catch her speaking at an upcoming event. And so, Nancy, give us the best way to contact you and reach out to you.
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter/X. And then my agency that I co-founded is called HBT Marketing, hbtmktg.com. We've abbreviated marketing in our URL, but and we post a lot of interviews and articles and just great content about behavioral science there. And you can also find me there too. So I'd love to hear either on social media or via email from any of your listeners that have any questions or that want to just continue the conversation.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you. And thanks to the listeners. If you listen to the podcast and also want to see Nancy and I, the video of this podcast and others can be found in the podcast section of contentmonster.com. Again, Nancy, thank you. And thanks for listening.
Thank you. My pleasure, Lee.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Marketing podcast, a show brought to you by ContentMonster.com, the producer of B2B digital marketing content. Show notes can be found on ContentMonster.com, as well as aleejudge.com. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platform.